The wedding hall in Makola sparkled with gold, music, and laughter. Everyone admired the bride, while servants carried trays of food and drinks. But in the corner stood Amina, the daughter no one cared about. Her mother had whispered to her before the ceremony, "Stay invisible. Don't spoil your sister's moment." She wore a simple dress, nothing like the shining outfits of the others, and every laugh from her relatives felt like a knife. Some cousins pointed at her, giggling about how she looked, while others ignored her as if she didn't exist. Amina sat quietly, her plate untouched, her heart heavy. She wanted to clap, to smile, to belong, but the command to disappear echoed in her mind. She felt like a shadow in a hall full of light. The music grew louder, the cameras flashed brighter, but none of it touched her. Inside, something was breaking, and something else was being born. Every insult, every look of pity, every order to stay silent added fuel to a fire rising in her chest. That night, while everyone danced and celebrated, Amina stood still, her face calm but her soul burning. No one in that glittering hall knew it, but the girl they had silenced was making a promise to herself. She would vanish as they wished, but not in shame. She would vanish to build a life so bright that one day, they would search for her in every crowd, begging for the daughter they once told to disappear. The hall was still alive with music, laughter, and flashes from cameras that followed the bride wherever she moved. Everyone's eyes sparkled with joy as they clapped and cheered for the couple, their voices rising above the beating drums. But in the far corner of the room sat Amina, quiet and forgotten, her plate of food untouched, her glass of water still full. She looked around the hall one last time, watching her family celebrate without once noticing her. Her mother's words echoed again in her head, "Stay invisible." And so, she obeyed, but in her own way. Without a sound, Amina pushed her chair back and stood. Nobody turned. Nobody asked where she was going. She walked slowly toward the kitchen door, her plain dress brushing against the shiny gowns of guests who didn't even look at her. The smell of jollof rice and fried chicken filled the air as she slipped into the kitchen, where busy hands carried plates and trays. The cooks didn't notice her either. She was like air, passing through the room without a trace. Outside, the night air wrapped around her like freedom. The music grew faint behind her, swallowed by the city noise of Makola. She took off her shoes and held them in her hands as she walked barefoot down the narrow street, away from the glowing wedding hall. Each step felt lighter, as if she was shedding years of pain with every movement. Back inside, the family cheered louder, raising glasses, praising the bride's beauty, dancing until their feet ached. They never realized that Amina's chair was empty, her food cold, her heart gone. No one searched the room for her, no one called her name. She had disappeared as quietly as a shadow at sunrise. But Amina was not only walking away from a wedding. She was walking away from the life that had chained her to silence. She was leaving behind the people who had buried her spirit with their words. In that moment, she chose herself for the first time. The city streets stretched ahead, full of unknown paths, and she felt a fire grow stronger inside her. Her silence was not weakness. It was power. It was a storm gathering strength, waiting for the right time to break. And though her family danced and laughed, thinking they had erased her, Amina knew the truth. They had set her free. The same silence they forced on her would return one day, not as quiet obedience, but as a roar so loud it would shake the very walls they once hid her behind. That night, while drums and voices echoed in the hall she left behind, Amina walked into the darkness of the streets, no longer invisible. She was gone, and nobody noticed. But soon, everyone would. Abidjan was nothing like Makola. The city was bigger, louder, and full of strangers who did not know Amina's past. To them, she was not the invisible girl from a family wedding. She was simply a young woman trying to survive. At first, life was hard. She worked in a small cafe, cleaning tables and carrying trays. Every night she returned to a tiny room she rented, where the walls were cracked and the mattress thin. But even in that struggle, she felt freer than she had ever felt at home. No one told her to disappear. No one mocked her for being herself. For the first time, Amina could breathe. Slowly, she began to find people who saw her worth. A kind neighbor shared food with her. A woman at the market taught her how to bargain and save money. She made friends who cared about her stories and laughed at her jokes. These small acts of kindness filled the holes in her heart that her family had left. And as she grew stronger inside, she began to dream bigger. One day, she remembered the idea her father once mocked her for. She had told him about selling handmade shea butter and natural oils to women in the city. He had laughed, saying, "Who will buy from you?" Those words had cut her deeply back then. But now, in Abidjan, she decided to try. She started small, mixing creams in her little room, selling them to women in her neighborhood. They loved it. Word spread. Soon, her products were on shelves in shops, and her phone rang with orders. Every coin she earned, she saved. She did not waste her money on clothes or parties. Instead, she reinvested, buying better equipment, better packaging, and hiring 2 young women who needed work. What began as a small hustle turned into a growing business. Amina registered her company, created a name that spread across the city, and built a brand people trusted. The same girl who once sat ignored in a wedding hall now walked through the busy markets with her head high, greeted with respect. She was no longer invisible. She was Madame Amina, the young businesswoman everyone admired. She had turned every insult, every rejection, every lonely night into fuel. The family that once silenced her had no idea she was building an empire in the shadows. Her success was not just about money. It was about power, freedom, and dignity. Every bottle she sold, every coin she saved, was a brick in the new life she was building. And though her family thought she had vanished into nothing, she was rising higher than they could ever imagine. Amina's silence had become her armor. Their rejection had become her strength. And in the busy streets of Abidjan, far from the home that buried her spirit, she was no longer just surviving. She was becoming unstoppable. The wedding that once shined like gold had now turned into dust. The pictures that filled their living room no longer brought joy but sadness. Amina's sister, the bride who was once praised as the jewel of the family, now sat in her husband's house with tears running down her face. The marriage that was supposed to bring glory had turned into endless fights and shame. Her husband's promises of wealth and comfort had broken into pieces. Instead of love, there were arguments. Instead of luxury, there were debts piling high on their table. The glow that once made the family proud was gone, and the silence of disappointment filled their home. At the same time, their father's business began to collapse. Once known as a respected man in the city, he now sat with his head in his hands, struggling to pay his workers. The shop that once bustled with customers now stood half empty. The debts grew like weeds, choking everything he had built. Creditors knocked on the door daily, demanding their money. Friends who used to sit at his table no longer came around. Respect turned into whispers behind his back. Their mother, who once looked at Amina with nothing but disgust, now sat at night whispering words she never thought she would say. If only Amina were here, she could help. But Amina was not there. The same daughter she ordered to disappear, the same girl she pushed aside so her sister could shine, was now the only one who could rescue them from the storm swallowing their family. The relatives who had mocked Amina at the wedding now spoke her name with regret. "Where is she? Has anyone seen her?" they asked. Pastors prayed for her return. Neighbors whispered that Amina had vanished too completely, as if the earth had swallowed her. Some said she must have left the country. Others claimed she was struggling somewhere, hiding in shame. None of them knew that while they were drowning in desperation, Amina was building a throne far away. The family photo that once hung proudly on the wall looked incomplete. The daughter they erased, the one they thought was nothing, was now haunting their every thought. Every night, her mother stared at that empty chair from the wedding, the chair that stayed cold and untouched, and her heart ached with guilt. She realized too late that the daughter she buried in silence was the only one strong enough to carry them now. But Amina's silence was louder than their cries. She had heard their voices in her memory too many times, telling her she was worthless, invisible, unwanted. Now, they were the ones invisible to her. The same family that forced her out of their lives was now begging for her to return. Their world was collapsing, and the key to saving it rested in the hands of the daughter they never believed in. The family that once told Amina to disappear was now desperate to find her. The fall of their business and the shame of her sister's broken marriage had left them in ruins. Suddenly, the daughter they mocked, the one they erased from their lives, became the only hope they had left. Relatives who once turned their faces away from her now walked through the streets of Accra holding her old photographs, showing them to strangers, begging for any clue. "Have you seen this girl?" they asked shopkeepers, taxi drivers, and market women. But no one recognized her. Pastors stood in churches, calling her name in their prayers. They told the congregation that Amina was the missing piece that could restore her family's fortune. Some church members even joined the search, passing out flyers with her faded school photo. On social media, posts spread like wildfire, "Please, Amina, wherever you are, come home. Your family needs you." People shared the posts, tagging friends in different cities, trying to reach her. For the first time in her life, Amina's name was on everyone's lips. The girl who was once invisible at her own sister's wedding had suddenly become the most wanted woman in the city. The family even hired private investigators, paying them money they did not have, just to track her down. The investigators went from bus stations to cheap hotels, asking questions, following rumors. But every trail ended in silence. Amina had vanished too cleanly, leaving behind no trace of where she had gone or who she had become. Some began to say she was dead. Others whispered that she had run away to a foreign land and changed her name. But none of them knew the truth. The irony was sharp and bitter. The same people who once told her to stay invisible now spent their days and nights trying to find her. The same mother who had told her to sit quietly at the wedding now cried into her hands, begging God to bring her daughter back. The same cousins who laughed at her plain dress now walked the streets shouting her name. Everywhere in Accra, her face appeared on posters and flyers, her name echoed in prayers and conversations. But Amina herself was nowhere to be found. And while they searched in desperation, Amina was living her new life far away, stronger and richer than they could ever imagine. She had built her silence into armor so thick that their cries could not reach her. To them, she was a ghost, impossible to catch. To the city, she had become a mystery, the vanished daughter who turned into a legend. And the cruelest truth of all was clear: the girl they once ignored, mocked, and silenced had now become the center of their world. The invisible child was now unforgettable. The charity gala in Lagos was the kind of event where the rich and powerful came to shine. The hall glowed with chandeliers, the air filled with soft music, and cameras flashed as guests arrived in their best clothes. Everyone expected to see politicians, business leaders, and celebrities, but no one expected the entrance that would silence the room. The doors opened, and Amina walked in. She wore a flowing gown that shimmered under the lights, her diamonds sparkling like stars on her skin. Her steps were calm, her head held high, and her presence demanded attention. Every camera turned to her, snapping pictures as though she was royalty. Across the room, her family froze. Their mouths hung open, their eyes wide with disbelief. The daughter they had buried in shame, the girl they had mocked and erased, now stood in front of them as the honored guest of the night. And she was not alone. On either side of her walked powerful business partners and investors, people who called her with respect, Madam Amina, CEO. Each word struck her family like thunder. The same relatives who once laughed at her plain dress now stared at her in gowns worth more than their failing home. Her father, who once dismissed her ideas, could not raise his eyes to meet hers. Her mother, who told her to stay invisible, trembled as she watched her daughter shine brighter than anyone in the hall. Her sister, who once carried the family's pride on her wedding day, now stood small and forgotten in the corner, overshadowed by the sister she tried to outshine. The humiliation shifted instantly. The shame no longer rested on Amina, it sat heavy on them. Guests around the room whispered in shock. Is that not the daughter they said was useless? Look at her now, she is the one carrying the wealth of nations. The whispers grew louder, and soon the entire hall buzzed with the story of the invisible daughter who had returned as a queen. Amina smiled politely, greeting others, but she did not rush to her family. She walked with elegance, each step showing the power she had earned with her own hands. She had no need for anger or loud words. Her very presence was enough. The daughter they cast aside had risen so high that the whole world could see, and there was no hiding from it. Her family tried to shrink into the shadows, but it was too late. Every guest saw the truth. The people who had once treated her as nothing were now standing in the glow of her success, exposed for their cruelty. And as the cameras flashed, capturing the moment forever, it was clear to everyone in that hall, the story had turned. The shameful daughter was now the star, and the family that rejected her was left drowning in their own humiliation. Her mother could not sit still any longer. She had watched her daughter walk into the gala like a queen, watched the cameras flash, watched the powerful men and women of Lagos bow their heads to greet her. The shame in her chest burned too heavy to carry, so she stood and tried to make her way through the crowd. Guests stepped aside, their eyes curious, as the woman who once silenced her own child finally faced her again. Her lips trembled as she whispered, Amina, hoping her daughter would smile, hoping she could erase the years of pain with one desperate word. But Amina did not smile. She stood tall, her diamonds catching the light, her calm eyes locked on the mother who once told her to vanish. And then, with a voice clear and steady, she spoke words sharper than any knife, you told me to disappear. I did. And in my absence, I found the life you never believed I deserved. The hall went silent. Every laugh, every whisper, every sound melted into nothing. All that remained was the echo of her words hanging heavy in the air. Guests turned their heads, their eyes moving from the trembling mother to the powerful daughter. The shift was undeniable. The woman who had once been invisible was now the center of the world, and the mother who once commanded silence now stood speechless before her. Her father lowered his head, unable to meet the eyes of the daughter whose dreams he once mocked. Her sister clutched her gown, her face pale, realizing that the crown she thought she wore had slipped away forever. And her mother, who once believed silence was strength, could only swallow her tears as the truth struck her harder than any insult she had ever given. The guests watched in awe. Some whispered, did you hear what she said? Others nodded, their faces lit with admiration. They saw a story unfold before them, a story of pain, rejection, and glory. Amina had not only survived her family's cruelty. She had risen above it, and now she stood reclaiming her place in front of them all. Her calmness was more powerful than any scream. She did not need anger. She did not need revenge. Her presence, her success, and her words were enough to turn the hall into her stage. She had claimed her throne not with force, but with dignity. And every single person in that room felt the weight of it. As the silence stretched, the truth became clear, Amina was no longer the forgotten daughter. She was the woman who turned rejection into strength, who turned silence into power. And in that moment, before her family and the world, she was not invisible anymore. She was unforgettable. The hall was still heavy with silence when the doors opened again and a group of lawyers walked in, their files in hand. Guests looked around in confusion, but Amina only smiled softly, as if she already knew what was coming. One of the lawyers stepped forward and addressed the room with confidence. Papers were laid out, and with every word spoken, the truth cut deeper into her family's hearts. Months before, while her father's business was sinking, Amina had quietly stepped in. She had bought the company, signed the deed in her name, and saved it from falling into the hands of strangers. The family gasped, their faces pale as the lawyers confirmed, the company they thought still belonged to them was no longer theirs. It belonged to the daughter they had cast aside. Her father's hands shook. The empire he had built, the pride he once carried, was gone. Her mother covered her mouth, unable to believe that the same daughter she had told to vanish now owned everything. Her sister lowered her eyes, realizing they had not only lost Amina, they had lost the world they stood on. The guests whispered in shock, watching the powerful shift play out like a scene from a movie. The family's desperation was laid bare, not born from love, but from survival. They needed her, not because they cherished her, but because without her, they were nothing. Amina looked at them one last time, her smile calm and sure. Then she turned and walked away, not as the invisible girl they once buried in shame, but as the unforgettable woman who held their fate in her hands.